Okay, my battery died, so I will not be talking loud to you. I will be talking softly to you in a very faint voice at the bottom of the amphitheater. I don't know how it sounds to you, but all the sound comes directly to me, so I get kind of freaked out about it. Maybe it's fine for you, I don't know. But here we are. And unfortunately and sadly, and it's really unpleasant, but we have an exam tomorrow. Tomorrow night in Blackrock Exam Center. Blackrock Exam Center is over in the Smurfit School in Blackrock. It is a giant warehouse of a thing. Most of you have been there, but for those of you who haven't, oh, joy awaits you. It'll be so wonderful. It's a palace of exam taking. Anyway, that's where it's going to be at 7 o'clock. It takes a while to get there, so leave some time. But that's where it's at. So it's in the corner of that. So if you type into Google Blackrock Exam Center, it knows it. But it's in the Smurfit campus, in the corner that's closest to Blackrock City itself. City, yeah. The metropolis of Blackrock. It's really close there. They have a superhero looking after them and everything over there. Blackrock man. Anyway, that's where it is. So I say 7 to 8 p.m. so that you have an idea the time to leave. Not the time to leave, but the time to allow yourself for the exam. Most people will probably be done before an hour. If you want to stay for 3 hours, I don't mind. So you have unlimited time. This is just for your personal scheduling convenience that I put a thing down. Okay. So, 15 multiple choice questions, no negative marking, so you should answer every question. If you know nothing at all about economics or macro or anything like that, you'll still do better by guessing than by not taking the exam. So that is the thing to do. So you should guess. Like the idea is in multiple choice. The idea in multiple choice is that you're intended to use a process of elimination. Right? I am just a schmuck trying to write questions. I haven't done it yet. I'm doing it tonight. I'm really not looking forward to it. I'm just doing my best to ask questions. So I'm going to come up with stuff that I think I can do in multiple choice, and I'm going to put it down there, and I'm going to come up, this is the right answer. Maybe I'll have one or two that I can see where people would go wrong, but I have to put in 4 or 5, and so there's going to be some of them that are just stupid, right? Because that's all I got. Right? And so if you sit down and you totally freak out, you don't know the answer and you just guess, you're not going to do great, right? But if you sit down and say, I don't know the answer, but let me use what I do know to try to eliminate as many of these that are clearly wrong as possible, then you're guessing from 2 instead of guessing from 5, right? And you'll do much, much better that way. So you have all the time in the world. Take a deep breath, go through, answer the ones that are obvious. Read all the answers, because we're looking for the best answer, not the right answer, right? Sometimes one can be clearly better than the other, so read all your answers. You have all the time in the world. Read all the answers. If it's obvious, answer it. If it's not obvious, mark it. Come back to it. 9 times out of 10, other questions on the exam will give you a clue about that question. Right? It's not like I'm some kind of exam writing genius that can totally 15 questions that are totally unrelated to each other. I got 2 subjects, right? We got the Phillips curve, we got Fisher-Gray. They're going to be related to each other. So other questions are going to give you clues to this one. Be calm, be cool, take your time. If you're freaking out, sit back for 45 minutes, count the stars, come back to it. I have no problem staying there till midnight. There's no issues with time. Deep breath. Read all the answers. If you don't know, circle it, come back. Use the information that you've learned from other questions to answer it. And process of elimination. Right? Eliminate the ones that are stupid, and then go for the ones that look better. Okay. Now, one very, very sad and unfortunate thing about this whole event is there's 400 students. You may have noticed. Well, you didn't notice because, a lot of them aren't here. But in general, there's 400 students. On the day, there'll be 380, 390. That's a lot of students. We have a few invigilators. There is no way mechanically that I can answer questions during the exam. Okay? Which means I'm writing the exam questions tonight. There'll be vodka involved. And if I screw up a question, can happen, has happened. If I screw up a question, hopefully not, but if I do, I can't deal with it on the day. I just can't. Mechanically, with 400 people, it just doesn't work. It becomes chaos in the hall, right? So I have to be in police mode, and it's unpleasant. I don't like it, but it's a thing I have to do, right? So I can't answer your questions, which means if one of them screwed up, there's nothing I can do to fix it then, okay? So what you need to do is you need to say, this one screwed up, do the best you can, and then you will get to keep the question sheet. You will have the questions as you go out. The next day, I will post the answers, or what I think are the answers. And if you disagree with any of the answers, I am delighted to hear your reasoning. I can and typically usually have seen it in other ways and say, oh yeah, question C could be right by a reasonable interpretation of this question, and I allow answer C as well, right? But I can't do it at the moment. So. Now, make a note of it, like if there's multiple ways to interpret it, or if you don't agree with my answer, you interpreted it differently. I want to hear that. I want to fix that. I want it to be a fair exam. I want it to be a test of your basic knowledge of this stuff. Problems with questions can arise, or usually it's a reasonable person, a reasonable student could interpret it differently than I did, and I didn't see that interpretation. I want to know that, but I can't know it tomorrow night. We'll deal with it Friday. Okay? So you'll write me an email explaining your point of view, and we'll sort it out. Okay? Questions about that? Okay. It's just unfortunate, but what can you do? Okay. What else? Subjects. Subjects matters on the exam. We got two subjects. We got the Phillips curve, and we've got Fisher-Gray, right? So for the Phillips curve, we got the Phillips curve, right? It's the Phillips curve, how people's expectations influence the Phillips curve, long run versus short run in the Phillips curve. What happens if you have a conservative central banker versus a central banker that cares a lot about inflation? These sorts of things, right? And adaptive versus rational expectations. We had it both in the Phillips curve, and we had it in the Fisher-Gray, so you should understand what's going on with that. And you're responsible for the assumptions of the Fisher-Gray, but not manipulating them, but understanding what they are. Like if I put it down, but put down one of the assumptions and asked you to, you can't explain it because it's multiple choice, but if I put down 4 different explanations of it, you should know which one is right, right? Or an interpretation of it. So, the assumptions that went into it, you're responsible for. You are responsible in this exam for interpreting the results. So if I say, here's a Fisher-Gray model, here's what the results look like, you should be able to tell me, is the central bank able to influence output or not? You should be able to pick from a list of 3 reasons why he might be able to affect output or not affect output, and give me the right one, right? But you are not, on this exam, responsible for any of the manipulations that got there. Right? You're not responsible tomorrow for how to go from the assumptions to our model. You're not responsible for going from the model to the results tomorrow. You will be on the final exam, but not tomorrow. And the reason is, this is math. Math is not something that anyone can learn just by staring at somebody else doing it. You have to do it yourself. You have to take out a pencil and paper and work through it yourself before any of it's ever going to stick. And you just haven't had a chance to do that yet. After the break, you'll have plenty of chance to do that, but so far you haven't. So even though you have all the infrastructure that you need to solve these models, I don't think it's fair to test that yet until you've had a chance to actually do it yourself. Okay, that's what I prepared to talk about the exam. And I'm hoping that you guys have loads of questions that I can ramble on about. This is my dream. Yes.
On question 12, the first MCQ questions, there's something that I don't understand a question.
Okay, let's go to question 12. Look, I'm prepared. Can you believe it? It's shocking. Question 12, just like that. I'm so proud. Okay, you're solving a Fisher-Gray staggered contract model. And what do we find? What do we got going on in this model? Okay, let's see what from this. Okay, we're supposed to say. Okay, you're solving it and you make this guess. Then you find out that the actual price prediction error, if your guess was correct, and plug them into your original process, getting this. You're not responsible for this. This is a little bit of manipulation in a Fisher-Gray contract model, right? And you're not responsible for manipulation in a Fisher-Gray contract model. Now, because we're here, because like teachers got to teach, that they can't help it. This is just a thing. What you're meant to do is say, well, here's our guess was something times ET, something times ET minus 1, something times VT minus 2. And here we got something times ET, something times ET minus 1. So we're meant to say R1 is equal to this thing, and R2 is equal to this thing, and R3 is equal to 0. And we're meant to solve that for R1 and R2 and then interpret the results, which you can do. You have the technology to do it now, but it's off the table for tomorrow. Okay. There was a question over here? So in the Fisher-Gray model, so in the Fisher-Gray model, we did a bunch of manipulation, and we found that output was something plus something times price prediction errors, right? And so if we made no price prediction errors, that first something was what output would be. And so we kind of think that's the normal level of output. If we're not making mistakes in our guesses, that's the normal level of output. And it was like a manky, unpleasant piece of algebra, right? It was n's and 1 minus n's and log of, I don't know what it was a bunch of junk in there, right? And we didn't want to carry that junk around everywhere, so we gave it a name. And since it's what output would be if we didn't make any price prediction errors, it was natural to think of that as the normal level of output, potential output. Okay. Got a question in the back too. Yeah.
But if I was just guessing, then I'd probably do R1 plus R2 1.
What was the point of putting this in the guess at all? We didn't see the model, right? So we're given just the guess. So we don't know what made this person make this guess. But in general, you might not know. Like if you knew what the answer looked like, you obviously wouldn't have included it in the first place. But you might not know, you might put in extra stuff. Okay? And nothing bad happens when you put in extra stuff is the point here. It just comes out 0. You make your algebra life a little harder, but it comes out 0. Okay. Okay.
So for that, I guess, would you almost let us see if you actually did try to solve it and find that your guess was like actively impeding the solution in some way, so it's actually incorrect?
Yeah, and when we come back after the break, we're going to do an example where I guess wrong to see what it looks like. Because until you see what it looks like, it's okay. He's verifying the guess. He always guessed correctly. Good for him. That doesn't help me at all, right? It's important to know what it looks like. Okay? You will find when you start doing 3 or 4 of these that the guesses are not hard to make, but potentially you could get it wrong, right? And it's important to know what it looks like when you get it wrong. But again, we haven't gotten there.
Can you put up worked solutions to the examples that you've given?
I cannot. I won't be able to do that in time. I'm like writing an exam tonight, and that's all I'm doing. Okay. This is my life from here until, yeah. Now, in fairness, you're not supposed to work any solutions, right? If it requires algebra, it's not on the exam tomorrow. Right? It will be on the final exam, but will not be on the exam tomorrow. So this would not be a fair question for tomorrow. Right. Oh, yeah.
You're responsible for question 14.
14, let's see what it looks like. Is this in the same set of? No, this is in some other set. This one.
No, it was the same set.
14.
It's about like taxes.
What, did I miss it? What's the question?
No, World War Ricardian equivalence models.
No, if I put a Ricardian equivalence, I'm sorry if I did that. No, you didn't do Ricardian equivalence. We probably will do after the break, but no Ricardian equivalence. And I'm sorry for putting that if I put that on. You're not responsible for Ricardian equivalence. You're not responsible for either Ricardo or Barrow. They're responsible for their own behavior, and so no. I love how whenever I make an error, everyone gets real loud. Yes. I can't hear, sorry. So this is a good question. And my wife watched one of my videos and she said, what you got to do is you got to repeat the question. No one can hear it. So I will repeat it also for you guys. What are you supposed to do with adaptive and rational expectations in the Phillips curve model, right? So here's the kind of story you can tell. If I can. So what, we've got unemployment, we've got inflation, we've got the natural rate of unemployment, and suppose that we have a Phillips curve up here. And so this is the expected rate of inflation, right? And suppose that people form this expected rate of inflation, and then the chairman of the central bank was arrested for child trafficking. He's off in jail, and we no longer have, so we get a new chairman of the central bank, and it's all hushed up, and nobody notices in the media. I'm making fun, but you know Barney Frank, the congressman, the Frank Dodd law, that one? When he was young, he was caught with his boyfriend running a prostitution ring in his house. I didn't know nothing about it. And it's hard to be gay. And that seemed to work for him. Okay. And so we have an indifference curve for the central bank. And I have this goofy story about the guy child trafficking and all this because we clearly misguessed our expectations. We were expecting one thing, but we're getting a different sort of central bank, and so his indifference curve is not tangent at our expected inflation. We're not in long-run equilibrium because we have this new central bank president. Okay? And we can do adaptive versus rational expectations in this model. So let me do adaptive in red. What I think is well, what we get is we get this, right? We get something tangent here, and we get high unemployment, and we get inflation in period 1, which is high. If we have adaptive expectations, we continue for our next period. Our expectation in period 2 is just what we got this period, right? Which means we get a Phillips curve going through here, and we get indifference curves tangent somewhere like this, right? If we have adaptive expectations, it's going to take a long time for us to slowly work the inflation down. We say, we had high inflation today, so we think we're going to have high inflation tomorrow. And therefore, this guy, this conservative central banker, thinks inflation is too high, I got to work it down, and we get high unemployment. Then we think, oh, inflation is still high today, I expect it to be high tomorrow. And again, it slowly works down. So we can have a very long period where we have high unemployment as we slowly work these Phillips curves down, because our inflation expectations only change a little bit each time. Right? If we had, let me just do the whole thing over. Here's our original Phillips curve. And here's our original equilibrium. Wow, that's very sad. Okay, let me do that over again. Make it steep. And our original equilibrium looks something like this. Right, this is the actual inflation we got. If we had rational expectations, people would understand the model. And they would say, no, I'm looking for a point where the inflation that I expect is the inflation that I get. And if I just think inflation is like yesterday's inflation, he's going to keep lowering the inflation rate, driving up unemployment, until he gets to some long-run equilibrium. So if I had rational expectations, I could jump immediately to the long-run equilibrium, and we could get something like this. Phillips curve 2, where it's just tangent right there. Okay. And we could jump around equilibrium. And that's the difference. With adaptive expectations, our expectations only adjust slowly as new information arrives. But with rational expectations, we can go immediately to the new long-run equilibrium. So when we get this conservative central banker, if we have adaptive expectations, we're going to have a protracted period of unemployment and high inflation. Whereas if we had rational expectations, we would go immediately to the long-run equilibrium with a lower inflation bias and the natural rate of unemployment. So it's about the speed of adjustment. Okay? Both of them end up in the same place eventually, but adaptive expectations can take a long time to get there with high unemployment as a result. Yeah?
So the main difference is just whether people know the model or not. In which case, if they know it, then they can expect that eventually they get their good grade before it does. If they don't know it, then it will take longer because they don't get it.
I mean, that's one way to think about it. In rational expectations, so the question is the main difference between rational and adaptive expectation is that rational expectations, they know the model, whereas in adaptive expectations, they don't. In rational expectations, they do know the model, so that part is true. Adaptive expectations, actually, we're being nastier to them than just not knowing the model. We're saying, not only do you not know the model, but you don't have any model in mind, you're just expecting this because I told you so. Right, I'd say, you're expecting tomorrow to be like today. Told you so, now, that can actually be reasonable. Like humans aren't these infinite calculating machines that we pretend in economics. It's not like adaptive expectations never make sense. I mean, you can go to like investment firms, right? And they do have all this mechanical trading, and they have lines that they extend out, and they try to use the past information to predict the future. In real life, a lot of people use past information to try to predict the future, which is not unlike adaptive expectations. Okay, it's more sophisticated, but it's still fundamentally adaptive expectations. It's not, here's how the world works, therefore I think we're going to end up here. Okay? So it's not saying that it's unrealistic, but it is saying that as a way to make a model, it's a bit problematic because we are systematically tricking people. And that's how our policy is effective. And that's, you can have your own judgment on how human beings behave, but it allows us to get any answer we want, which is a bit ridiculous. And if we think that these things are important, otherwise, why bother, then people should treat them as important and try to predict how the world works. And so rational expectations, while it's extreme, is getting at that. Okay? So people aren't really that sophisticated. No one really knows the model of the world, but more towards that side. Now, there's one where we're telling them what to expect and one where we're saying that they're infinitely perfect calculating machines and they know the model of the world. Truth is clearly somewhere in between, but yeah, no but. The truth is clearly somewhere in between. Yeah? Sure. All right, let me get the question. This one. This is the one. Okay, and I couldn't hear the actual question. So the question is, does rational expectation imply that everyone knows what the central bank is going to do? What rational expectation says is that they are trying to predict the central bank, and the central bank is behaving. If the central bank is behaving in a predictable way, they do their best to predict it with the information they have. So in practice, in the models, what it means is that they know the rule that the central bank is using, right? Whether the central bank formally announces it or they just sort of learn it over time, we're not saying here. Yeah.
And then what would be a situation where central banks can't stabilize output?
I couldn't hear, sorry.
What would be a situation where central banks can't stabilize output?
The central bank, where it couldn't. So in this one, it can because the central bank's choice variable is gamma. And we see gamma here. And in particular, if you set gamma equal to -1, this is 0, and output is always stable, right? If we didn't see gamma here, then they would be totally unable to stabilize output. And there's lots of cases where they can partially stabilize output, but not fully stabilize output. And we saw one of them, right? In our 2-period contract model, there were people that were setting their wages 1 period ago, and people that set their wages 2 periods ago. Right? And the central bank had better information than that second group, but not than the first group. So it was able to stabilize the output that was coming because of those 2-period price prediction errors, but not the output changes that were coming from 1-period price prediction errors, because it didn't have better information than those people. Right? So in that case, you could say, yeah, they can partially stabilize output, but not fully stabilize. Now, in this case, by picking gamma equal to -1, they can fully stabilize output, and the shocks don't have any effect at all. Did that answer your question? Yeah, great. Yeah. Sorry, I can't hear. The long run and the short run Phillips curve. So the long run Phillips curve is a bit of a jargon. I really think of it more as a short run Phillips curve thing, right? We have our Phillips curve, inflation, unemployment. We got our Phillips curve that looks like this, where this is expected inflation. And that will move up and down as our expected inflation changes and we change our wage contracts. The long run, so this is short run Phillips curve. Right? Long run Phillips curve is that in the long run, people aren't going to be making price prediction errors at all. And so in the long run, we are going to get the natural rate of unemployment. Right? This is U bar. So our long run Phillips curve is just going to be a vertical line. Okay. But just like in the other models, we're always in the short run, right? The long run is kind of a tendency eventually, but it's not something that we're ever going to see per se. We're not going to ever observe this long run Phillips curve, but in the long run, we're going to have natural rate of unemployment, right? So in the long run, the central bank is not going to be able to change unemployment in a long-term way, right? We're going to have the natural rate of unemployment. Now, we can change that through other policies, fiscal policies, education policies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but we can't change it by just playing around with the money supply. Okay. Yes? It is not in the book. Yes, not in the book. So that was, where do I find it in the book? And you do not. Yeah. Yeah. After the break, we're going to have more book stuff, but actually some book stuff. Like we haven't had much at all, but as of now, not in the book. Oh, yeah. Okay, let me repeat the question and correct me if I'm wrong. Can I explain rational expectations again? And in the, right? Yeah, sorry. Yes. So true. But thank you for correcting me if I'm wrong. Explain inflation bias and why is it? Why is it lower for rational expectations? Okay, so the second part is incorrect, and that's what I want to. So I'm going to explain inflation bias, and then I'm also going to explain that, if I can remember to, and correct me if I don't. Like, okay, so let's start out with what is inflation bias. So unemployment, we've got our natural rate, we've got our unemployment target, we've got our inflation target. Right? And the first thing we did when we did this is we said, it is not possible to have an equilibrium where you are getting your inflation target. Right? That's not possible. Because if you were getting your inflation target, you would be really close to your inflation target, right on it. Please, people. You'd be right on your inflation target, but you'd be far off from your unemployment target. So the central bank would have an incentive to increase inflation, because they don't care much about it because they're really close, in order to reduce unemployment, which is a big problem because they're far from their target. Right? So you're not going to be able to get your inflation target. Okay? And so what we're going to look for is we're going to look for a long-run equilibrium. And a long-run equilibrium is going to have some Phillips curve, right, which crosses somewhere above the inflation target. And that means that this is expected inflation, and it must be that we are getting our expected inflation. Right? So it must be that the indifference curve looks something like this. This is long-running group. And this distance here is the inflation bias. Right. It has got to be positive, because if we made it 0, then we will be right on our inflation target, but far off from our unemployment target. And so the central bank would want to give us more inflation. Right? And so our expectations wouldn't be correct. Or not, or not. All right, and your second part of your question was? Yeah, so the second question is about rational expectations versus adaptive expectations. So it's not lower, it is the same. Like the long-run equilibrium in both of those, rational and adaptive expectations, looks exactly the same. So the inflation bias is exactly the same either way. The question about them is, if you're not on equilibrium, if we have some other expected inflation other than this one that's long-run equilibrium, how long does it take us to adjust our expectations to long-run equilibrium? And with rational expectations, everybody knows the model. There's no randomness in this story, so you jump there immediately. But with adaptive expectations, it takes a whole series of, I think the inflation is high, therefore I expect high inflation, therefore he gives me a little less, but not all the way down, and we just slowly work our way there. Or if inflation is too low, we slowly work our way up. Right? Whereas in rational expectations, we're just going to jump there. But the there is exactly the same in either expectations. Very nice question. Thank you very much.
Thinking about what's the logic on the moving from natural unemployment to the target unemployment? Why we should? Because if we also we have natural unemployment, okay? So we can balance the natural unemployment because we set the wages according to the inflation. And why we should set the target lower? Because just to employ people.
So why is the target low? Is the first is. I'm going to answer it. I don't know if it's quite your question, but the big question is, why is the inflation target low? If the inflation target was I mean, actually, the unemployment target. Why is the unemployment target so low? So this is an assumption of the model to get the results we want. The target is whatever the target is, right? This is something that's in somebody's head. And he could want whatever the heck he wants, right? He could want to see everyone miserable on the street. His goal could be 100% unemployment, right? Because it's in his head. It's a preference. It's not an objective thing of the economy. Now, the reason we often think this way is in the economy, there's a number of reasons for unemployment, right? There's a number of reasons for unemployment. There's frictional unemployment, just because it takes a while to get a job. There's structural unemployment, people with skills that can't find work for those skills. And then there's this cyclical unemployment, right? That is coming about because of all this. All we're looking at, all they really control is cyclical unemployment. But you can imagine, as a good person, that it would be nice if there were no structural unemployment, right? Which means it would be nice if unemployment was less than the natural rate, because the natural rate includes structural unemployment, right? And so it is natural, and we sort of look at past policy, it seems like policymakers in general want unemployment to be less than its natural rate, but there's nothing forcing it in the model, right? We could easily have assumed that it was higher or the same as the natural rate. We don't, because this is kind of how we think the world is. We think central bankers are good people, despite all evidence. We think they're good people. Actually, yeah, some of them are nice. Yeah. But anyway, that's our starting point for this model. And you could put other things in. You don't get particularly interesting results out. And it doesn't, to most people, seem particularly policy relevant, because it seems like people generally want less unemployment than you would otherwise get. But you could do, right?
Follow this model, like when the employer found us very cheap, he made extra profit, and that's really expecting, so he'll hire more people.
Yeah.
But with another option, he'll buy higher capital, he'll invest in and hire. That profit, not compulsory, he'll hire more.
Yeah.
Because he'll invest in better technology and he'll have the same outcome.
Okay, so the question here is, when the employer finds workers cheap, we're assuming that he hires more workers, right? We could think about it differently, and he says he finds workers cheap, he's rolling in money. What does he do when he's rolling in money? Maybe he invests in capital, right? That's presumably a thing. Okay, people, it's just not working. Excuse me? Excuse me. It's not working. Like this talking cross rows, it's just not working in an amphitheater. If you want to do that, you can take it outside. Where was I? You could think he's going to do something else, right? Now, it is, I think, reasonably natural to think that in the short run, he's going to say, well, this input to production is cheap, let me buy more of it. But it's not required, right? But it is emphasizing that this is a short-run model, right? We're talking about something that's just for this set of wage contracts. And if you think buying more capital means buying another factory, that's going to take 5-10 years. Could happen, but we're not looking at long run in the model. But yeah, lots of things could happen, like in a reasonable way. Yeah. Yes. Okay, tomorrow night. Oh, glorious tomorrow night. We have no class on Friday because nobody wants it, and yeah. But, good luck tomorrow. I won't be able to be helpful, but I do hope you do well.